Welcome back to the Change Physician Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Cady, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. And today's episode is about real life nutrition or real life utilization of food, or however you want to claim it. We thought it was a conversation worthwhile. Sometimes it's good to think about these things around the turn of the year and how we're approaching the way we consume food or what we eat. And, do you want to go ahead and start out some perspective or topics, Kevin, about food?
Yeah, because it's this time of year, this is in January when this episode is being released, and we're doing some episodes. We had some previously published that you should have seen just before this one, where we're really talking to physicians who have really been involved in the nutrition world, who have published and researched. Obviously, you're hearing a lot of stuff about plant-based diets and things, and we have a couple more episodes coming up later on in this month where we'll be presenting, again, some really, really good information around food and eating. But what Melissa and I decided to do is, how can we then, because it's so conflicting. You have so many different recommendations. You have so many different diets. Someone's saying this is the right one. This is the wrong one. This is, you're wrong. If you do this, then you're right. And it has to be plant-based. On the other side, or you're only going to eat meat and butter, right? It's like, well, who's right in this stuff? And there's little grains of truth throughout of it. And so what we were going to do is kind of go through what I think are some of the easiest rules. And is not a physician who wrote these, but it comes from the book. I think this comes from Food Rules, and it's from the In Defense of Food was the kind of the big daddy of the books, but it's Michael Pollan. And Michael Pollan, if you don't know the name, you may have heard the phrase, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. We could almost leave the episode right there, because it's so beautifully succinct and within that little statement, we can then expand in so many different ways. But as long as you follow that mantra, you're pretty good. So he has expanded that in food rules, where he had 7 rules. And Melissa, if you like, we can start going through one by one and sort of deconstructing those, if you would prefer, or we could just have a discussion on the eat food, not too much, mostly plants, and it'll be a really short episode. But hey,
Sure. Do you want us to share the visual with that, or
let's start the visual so that people can kind of read them along with us.
Okay. Well, let me go ahead and share the screen here.
Right. And while Melissa's doing that, I'm going to just read the first of Michael Pollan's 7 rules here. And the first one is, don't eat anything your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. When you pick up that box of portable yogurt tubes or eat something with 15 ingredients you can't pronounce, ask yourself, what are those things doing there? And that's a fantastic rule, because what it has now done is segmented out a large portion of all the, let's just call it the bad stuff, the stuff that is designed to tempt us, where the processed food, which has been engineered in such a way, quite literally, to stimulate your brain, almost like a drug, so that you eat more, where you have people that have studied the crunch texture of chips, and that they engineer the chips to provide the most crunch and the most pleasure as measured in their food labs. And if you just follow that, what would your grandmother do? She wouldn't find something that's in a box. She wouldn't find that something in a plastic food. She wouldn't find something that you squeeze out of a tube or anything like that. It's talking about real food. So if you just do that alone, and you're pretty, I don't want to say religious, but 80 plus 90% of the time you're following that rule, you are off to a massive and good head start there.
Yeah, I think there's, staying as close to the original form, the most dense, as far as from a nutritional standpoint, most nutrient dense foods, that this is an important component when you look at the way things are created in this country for convenience, also for shelf life. There's just that, which actually you can probably, you'll tie into one of the other ones coming. But yeah, I think there's unfortunately also children that don't realize that where food really comes from, which is just astounding. So I always think, even if you don't get all of your food from a garden, it might be good to learn a couple little things you can put in a pot, whether it's, if you like hot peppers, those are pretty easy in Texas weather. There's various things that you can just, whether it's herbs, which have some really good nutrients in it that you can just add to a meal that may have come from a supermarket, might be partially processed, but you want to try to get some nutrients in. um, you know, that brings up a point that, you can't just live on 100 bottles of supplements and just eat supplements. Um, there's an inherent beauty and intelligence to the foods that are at their original form. And, this particular vitamin that you extract and put into a supplement by itself may not have the same kind of impact as the complexities of the interactions of various things that are in their whole form. So that's really hard to prove and to try to explain to people and for people to comprehend sometimes. But our body kind of knows what it needs and it'll extract what it needs. There are very few cases of people who have problems with extracting what they need. But if we can at least give the nutrients that are closest to, real food, that I think the takeaway there is nutrient dense food. And many times greens and the things we talk about are really important. So you want me to go to number 2?
Yeah.
So number 2, don't eat anything with more than 5 ingredients or ingredients you can't pronounce. It was just as an extension of, if you start having processed foods, there's going to be a lot of additives there that are, not quite maybe recognizable. It kind of ties into number 1. And number 3 is stay out of the middle of the supermarket, shop on the perimeter of the store.
You're going so fast. Well, you skipped over 2 so quickly that there's more to discuss there.
Well, you go, because I feel like it ties to everything we just said. So go for it.
I think it does, but I think that we can. There's you can pull that out a little bit more. Where if we're talking, huh?
That's what you're there for. Go ahead.
All right. So we were talking about the 5 ingredients is because that leads to different types of trickery, right? So a potato, if it's listed as 1 ingredient, potato, right? In the box, and you touched on this, where it may have now preservatives, it may have some sort of artificial flavors that are going to accent it. There may have some sort of inserted thing, coloring, things like that. The other one is it's also a way that they can sometimes hide ingredients. And what I mean there is, I don't see it's in here as sugar, but looking for additional added sugar. And so one thing that you can look at is, well, what are different words that people use for sugar? Because oftentimes what they'll do on a food label is they will separate those out so that they don't have to list it as the number 1 ingredient. So you may be eating I don't know, I'm trying to think of something, a cereal or a drink or whatever, and it may say, I'm just going to use potato. Maybe there's some new hot potato beverage out there that everybody wants. It says potato, and then the next ingredient may be something like sugar. And then the third ingredient may be actually brown sugar. I just saw this actually the other day. And then the third ingredient may be some, hydroxybutyrate or whatever, a flavoring agent. So if they're needing to expand the number of ingredients to add a bunch of processed things, and sometimes those really fancy words sound scary and they may not be, but anytime that you're kind of going beyond that normal, that's when you have a concern. And the other thing is they can be hiding stuff in there, as said, like added sugar. Sugar versus high fructose corn syrup will be listed in 2 different spots, but really they're just sugar and they should be put together. But the manufacturers don't want to do it, because then you're seeing on the label that sugar is the number 1 or number 2 ingredient in this thing that you think may be low fat, but actually it's super, super high sugar, which is probably worse.
Absolutely. I don't want to cut you off.
No. So do we have anything else to add for 2?
Well, I think that's very true. And they keep trying to make up new words for various types of sugars. It seemed to always be coming out. So it makes it even more confusing, which is another reason to stick to as close to real foods as you can, or just minimize, for infrequent use of processed foods. I don't have anything else really that's coming to mind at this point. Oh, the other thing is it strips most of our foods of fiber. So the natural fibers are typically non-existent in a lot of boxed processed type foods. So it's not just what you're seeing, it's what you're not getting, that I think is important to realize.
Well, and that goes back to your number 1 though, where you're talking about what you see and what you don't see.
Mhm.
is this idea of, supplements versus replacements, where people are taking them just to replace something when really they just should be there for those who need maybe a supplement.
Yes.
Because like you said, all that stuff that we don't see is as or more important. Those pieces in the real food, the stuff that is closer to the source, as you said, they don't tell you that that's missing, and we may not thinking about them, but super important to the foods that we're eating.
Yeah. And, a big thing that, for those that are not familiar, there's a lot of functional medicine practitioners out there, and some of them push a lot of supplements, which I don't. I've had some training in functional medicine. I'm not certified by any means. I'm not the expert in that realm, but I'll tell you that there's all kinds of clinicians, not just physicians, that are hanging their hat as a functional medicine clinician, and they can be very knowledgeable about the biochemistry of just all the various parts of how our food is taken in, or certain types of supplements or herbs that can impact your health in good or bad ways. So they can be helpful in maybe pinpointing some things that you don't realize. Maybe your diet is not that clean or not helping you, especially if you have a certain sensitivity. However, many times those things are figured out just by an elimination diet, which I'm not going to go into, but there's certain things that can be considered a little more sensitive for some patients that are more like allergens or create issues. And so just by reintroducing things slowly in a very commonsensical way, you can kind of figure out sometimes the things that are causing problems. Like some people have problems with dairy. And there's a lot of issues with the way the dairy is done in this country. And that's a whole other topic, especially in the places where they do mass production and add certain things to the products. So there are some people that have issues with dairy, but the whole point is that there's a lot of focus on the microbiome, and there's certain types of foods or items that can cause what they call leaky gut. And it's a very interesting biochemistry type physiological assessment of things. But it may not be the real reason, but it's still an interesting approach, because people have found some benefit in just changing how they eat, and a lot of their symptoms can get better. But it doesn't mean you need the whole set of supplements to take to replace your diet. But there are some people that need, select things that maybe they run low on, including vitamin D is a common one in a lot of people in America. But that I needed to say because it is just a different way of looking at things. But be wary that there are way different approaches, and some more extreme than others, and you can spend a whole bunch of money that may not be necessary. But it is, if you're struggling to find an answer, that might be something just to learn about, but don't throw the whole kitchen sink at once. Maybe take a common sense approach. Any comments about my comments about that?
Just where were we?
We're at number 2.
Okay.
Or you bounced back to 1, and I wanted to mention that, there's a lot of, you talked about supplements, and I just want to mention that there's a realm of medicine out there that some people are throwing a lot of supplements at people that may not be necessary. Number 3 is, did you have any comments?
No.
Okay. Stay out of the middle of the supermarket, shop on the perimeter of the store. Of course, we know that most of the real food are things that need to be refrigerated, the things that are, well, that ties into number 3, things that are perishable, tend to have some refrigeration or freezing going on. So that kind of, I don't think it has, there's not a lot to read into that, although you always surprise me, Kevin. You always find something to extrapolate from conversations.
Because that has to do with behavioral psychology is the reason that's set in that way, shape, or form.
So putting your face there and buying this, don't put yourself where you're tempted to buy things that are probably not good for you.
Yeah. So the places that they find people to travel most often are the ones where they're going to put the food that has the highest profit margin. And the second thing that does, and one of the reasons you'll find them on the perimeter, and specifically why you're seeing dairy and a lot of the real foods, the produce and things on the far back edges of the store, are so that you are forced now to walk through the store. That is intentionally done so that you see something, that you can't just run in and get a gallon of milk. You have to run in to get the gallon of milk and see the chips and the this and the ice cream and everything else on the way to get there. So yeah, it's if you can skirt, it's sort of like they made the minefield in the middle and you have to skirt through the minefield to get to the real food in the back of the store.
What would I do without you without getting the psychology added into this mix? That's awesome. I think people should think about that.
Well, anytime there's something, there's usually a reason behind it, either overtly or covertly. So, why is the supermarket designed as the way it is because it's intentionally designed in that way.
Yeah, it's funny how other people copy the same type of approach. Now, if you're at a stand in the middle of the street and they're just selling fruit, you just show up and there's all your, fruit. It's like a totally different layout.
That's a good point. Actually go to the farmer's market and it's more of this hodgepodge sort of thing. And now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I've ever been to a farmer's market, whereas it's, maybe someone brilliant farmer's marketer would set up some way, shape, or form. Yeah, they'll put all the processed food, the stuff for you to buy, maybe when you're walking in to get your groceries. I don't know. Anyway, but it's probably safer to go to the farmer's market just so you don't have to go through the psychological minefield that the stores are set up to be.
Yeah, or they overprice the processed stuff and say it's 50% off, and they still make a profit and put it right near the cash register. I've been a victim of that in the past. Yeah, good points. The number 4?
Don't eat anything that won't eventually rot. I do like how he calls out there's exceptions such as honey, but in generally things that like Twinkies that never go bad aren't food. I do like that one as well, because if there's something that you look at and you think that shouldn't be good probably 2 weeks from now or a week from now, and it still is, then it probably shouldn't be something that you eat.
Right. Well, I guess alcohol, that pretty much includes that.
Yeah. I guess
it doesn't really rot per se. It gets better over the years, in some cases.
Well, it turns to vinegar, but then you use the vinegar in your food. But yeah, I'm trying to think of exceptions. Yeah, honey, because honey is, I think they talk about they can found honey in like Egyptian tombs that you could still eat.
Wow.
Other ones, I don't know. That's a good one. But yeah, most stuff should rot, which is just the way of the world.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a zombie food. I guess Twinkies are zombie food. You gotta think
if you just need to survive, you'll take whatever you can get.
It's the undead of food.
Exactly. All right. Number 5, you want me to go for it?
Number 5, go for it.
It is not just what you eat, but how you eat. This is a good one. This one, the notes say here, always leave the table a little hungry. And there's a mention that many cultures have rules that you stop eating before you're full. Interesting. In Japan, they say eat until you're 4/5 full. I don't know how you determine that. Islamic culture has a similar rule, and in German, they say tie off the sack before it's full. Well, I can say I'm half Mexican, and I know from my Hispanic heritage, it is considered rude to not eat the food offered to you, and it's also typical to offer seconds. And it tends to, sometimes the meals tend to be filled with some stuff that may not be the healthiest or cleanest. So I think there's a lot to say about the habits, especially if it's not just talking about food. People are many times focused on the food when they're trying to lose weight. You can't just stop eating because we need nutrients to live. I've heard of the craziest stories of people that just try to starve themselves. But you're thinking about just caloric restriction, which to a certain degree can have some longevity benefit. However, if you're not getting the nutrients you need, that creates a problem. And I hear the stories of people almost killing themselves by just, basically starving themselves. Obviously, in this country, I wouldn't say that that's the biggest problem. We tend to be undernourished, overeating, but undernourished when it comes to the nutrients that we really need. Any thoughts on that, Kevin?
No, I like that one quite a bit. It's probably the one I struggle the most with, I think, personally, and for a bunch of different reasons. Mm-hmm. All our food habits have occurred throughout our life, and I can remember to a very one specific incident when I was about 12 or 13 that I like to say was responsible for some of my eating habits. why you clean your plate or whatever. And it's hard when there's good food, you don't want to leave it. And then you made up a really good point, is culturally, what is the culture view as rude or appropriate? Some cultures want you to clean the plate. Other cultures, you will, if you eat your plate, they will now stack more food on there because they'll think that you're hungry. It's only when there's food left that they think that you are okay. Like then it's okay, right? And oh, they were so good they couldn't finishing on their plate. Obviously, the food was really good. But if you ate your food, cleaned your plate, and then said, I don't want anymore, that would be considered rude. So we have that little cultural piece in there. A little trick around that for those of us like me who are the bingers, and once you start, you just don't stop, is the small plate rule. Have you heard of that one? Where the mindless eating thing, where eat on smaller plates and use smaller serving sizes, so that you're, instead of those big gargantuan things, massive sized dinner plates, are using some small. I'm not sure if that completely works, because then you still can just fill up another plate of that stuff again. But it's certainly better than stacking, one massive dinner plate full of food and then just eating the whole thing. So I think that's a great one. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of biophysiological data on that. But man, that one's a hard one for me.
Yeah. I think that's the small plate thing definitely can work. One thing this is kind of off topic, but I don't want to forget to mention is that speaking of like small plates, sometimes people may not realize how much they eat. And so sometimes counting calories can help you kind of define what you're really consuming. But when I think of an overall lifestyle, when we think of like real life nutrition, do I really want to be counting calories the rest of my life and being, that's not how I approach it. And I don't think if you're aware of kind of your overeating portions, or you're eating so frequently that you're never really hungry, I think that you can kind of just do the plate kind of portions thing, just make it a smaller plate and not have to overthink it. And the thing is, if you're really eating nutrient dense foods, and not having a lot of the sugar laden processed foods, and really filling up on things full of fiber, you tend to get full faster. And if you eat it slowly and mindfully, and you start with a smaller portion, you tend to be satiated. It's a lot of times when we're not getting what we really need, and we're eating these empty calories, so to speak, whether it's a lot of alcohol or sugar, those things, it's easier for people to put on the pounds and other issues like diabetes and other various things that are a big problem in this country. And a lot of times people say not too late or don't skip breakfast. I'm kind of in the mindset, there's a lot of stuff out there when it comes to intermittent fasting that can be beneficial for a lot of people, especially that are maybe they're diabetic prone and whatnot. But I think that if you stick to the clean rules, stay away from the sugars or the carbohydrates, it's not just straight sugar. There are various things that when you consume it, and you are we're not going to get into this whole insulin and glucagon type thing, but if you are getting a mad rush of calories that are not blended well with proteins and fats, and it's just straight simple carbs, and it's spiking your insulin and it's shooting up your blood sugar, and you are having, insulin tells you to store fat. So if you're spiking your insulin without a good steady stream of good nutrients versus these simple sugars and whatnot, then it makes things really hard to control your weight, control potential diabetes if you're at risk for that. So I think just a really mindful eating and look at the types of food you're eating, smaller portions, and listening to your body. Like for me, if I don't feel hungry in the morning because maybe I ate late the night before, if my body's not saying I'm hungry and I don't have some kind of medical condition that's making me not feel hungry when I should eat, most people don't have that problem. I find that if I just wait until I'm actually hungry, that's kind of probably the time I need to eat. And it doesn't have to be big. I could graze on something or a small meal. And I just find it interesting how people are not always in tune with what they're feeling and sometimes they're always eating and they don't even know what hunger feels like. Any thoughts?
Yeah,
That was a
awareness
lot.
is a good, yeah. Awareness is a really key piece.
Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of went on a diatribe there. The number 6 is, I'd like to hear what you think about this. Enjoy meals with the people you love.
Yeah, that one I don't know as much about, other than it's healthier to eat around people that you know. It probably has a little bit to do with, if you're eating in front of the TV, we tend to eat more. If we're eating, like you were mentioning before, with kind of automatic behavior without some sort of mindful intention behind it, where we're distracted, we tend to eat more. I would be kind of interested in, there's a friend of mine who's a surgeon who's really into nutrition, who sort of has read a lot on the stress and associated dietary changes with that. And really from the point of, if you're eating while you're stressed, you tend to not digest food as well.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't gone into it, but this is what she has done some talks on at some of the events that we've been in the past. And so I'm seeing this as, if you're eating around people that you care about, that you are feeling safe with, there's the potential that not only it may slow your eating down because you're talking, that you may be a little bit more aware of what you're eating again. So slow, and then paying attention maybe. And the last thing, it may actually have effect on your stress physiology, which would impact how you'd actually digest this material, or how well or how little you would digest it. So at the minimum, there's a whole lot of gain from it, and really no downsides that I can see, because it says people you love, not people you can't stand. So it's not like just eating with anybody.
Not any family, because
not any family. It's only the ones you love.
Yeah, it's interesting you said something about the stress. You think about in anesthesia, we're told if someone has a trauma, or whenever, like when you think about food that they ate, if the trauma happened like 2 hours after, but yet, we're not getting them to the operating room till 6 hours later, technically the digestion probably didn't really occur well. So you kind of consider them like kind of a full stomach, which is more concerning for us as anesthesiologists. But it makes you just think about overall anxiety and stress. And then when you're with the people you love, there's a certain sense of safety, like you said. And I think it's also because even if you might be, it says in this little thing that around a table, not a TV. And I think that's an important distinction. And I don't have the evidence to present to you or anything, but looking at a TV, even though you're hanging out with your friends, you may not be connecting as humans directly. I think they're both beneficial, having people you love near you, but I think it makes you focus on the human connection, not just the TV connection over there. So I think that
I would agree with you. And who knows what you're watching? You don't want to be watching the news or whatever it is, but the fear station.
2020, no, probably not.
Your local fear and outrage station is probably not the best way that'll affect your digestion. But I loved how you brought up the anesthesia standpoint, because from a just kind of nuts and bolts about stress significantly impacts our digestion. Mm-hmm. And it would make sense to think about that. Like if I don't think I've ever really seen that emphasized in any sort of real life kind of nutrition standard, is watch what your stress is when you're eating, because it can impact your digestion. But yeah, it should be in there. If you're trying to change your diet and you don't find you're losing weight or whatever, one of the things that you may not be thinking of is the stress in your life. So great point.
Which, this is a total aside, and because of anesthesia and you just mentioning mindful eating and whatnot, I was thinking, chew your food. I know this sounds like so simple, but scarfing it down and barely chewing it, I can't tell you how many times I've had to help out individuals that decided they could chew once on a chicken nugget and it gets stuck, and they have to go to the hospital to get help getting it out of their esophagus because it won't move. Just slow down, breathe, chew your food, and avoid going to the hospital. I'm not joking.
I got to add on to that too, because I have an anesthesia story for that.
Yes.
When I was deployed, in Djibouti, Horn of Africa, 11 miles from Somalia.
Uh-huh.
And, we had nothing. I mean, we had a couple of traumas that came in, but from the 6 months I was there, it was nothing serious. But one of the most serious things that we had was some kid who didn't look like he even chewed it. It was like the full steak stuck in his esophagus. I'm laughing, but it was like a big deal because if you don't get it out, it can kill you. Like not choke you to death, like you can't breathe, but actually can cause ischemia in your esophagus, and it can disrupt you, bleed to death. So
or leak, like everything goes in there starts leaking
yes.
into the thorax.
So that's a great point. Chew your food. Something simple. I don't know about the 100 times or whatever. People will say, well, chew your food 100 times. I'm like,
yeah. I mean, chew it into small pieces.
Yeah.
And if it's dry, get some fluid down.
Maybe chew it till it's baby foodish, maybe. I don't know. Yeah,
you just need it to be small enough, and if it feels sticky going down or dry, then follow it with some water right away.
I totally forgot about that kid and the steak, man. That just brought that right back.
Brought some memories. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've had to, and sometimes, just, whether we put a breathing tube in just in case things didn't go well, like there's just so many, like, don't even go there. It's a big medical bill you don't want. And on top of the potential complications if you don't deal with it. The last number 7, I took it off the screen because it's kind of like an interesting point about our culture in America is that don't buy your food where you buy your gasoline, because what's going to happen? You're going to end up eating it in the car or some convenient food that's processed, and who knows, it probably could last forever in your car, not to mention, but apparently in the US, 20% of food is eaten in the car. So that ties in a lot of the, eat real food, don't be, not that any of us have not been guilty of this. It depends. You might be on a long car drive, but try to minimize the convenience store meals. Heck, you could drop your food, you reach over and you get in a car accident because you're trying to manage that. It's bad enough people's coffee land hot on their lap or that spills all over them and they almost have a car accident there too. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I don't think I've ever been to a gas station that had food that you would ever say, yeah, that's super healthy. Like,
I can say the only time that we've probably grabbed something was maybe, in a whim of wanting something like a little, where they make it was a gasoline station that had like almost like a deli in the gasoline station. And it was in Florida, I think. And it was where they make your pizza like to order, like you tell them what you want on, they make it in front of you, kind of like a Subway, but they put it all on there and put it in the little, oven thing.
Was it an independent gas station?
It's I forgot the name of it, but it was like a pretty cool, it's not quite like Buc-ee's, but Buc-ee's is a massive, huge, anyone in Texas knows what it is, but it has like a little beaver for the symbol, BUCCEE', I think. Anyway, I have no investment in Buc-ee's, but it is filled to the brim with souvenirs and gifts on one end, and then sugar-laden halls aisles of just candy and processed foods. But they do have like a deli, and they make some actually really good chopped, speaking of some meat speaking of trying to minimize meat because the impact on the earth, which that would be another discussion. You can do your own research and the methane gas production and all the other things that we're concerned about. We don't need to eat as much meat as we probably are doing right now. There'd be people that would disagree with me, but they're usually meat lovers. So I forgot where I was going with that, but basically they have some of the chopped turkey sandwiches that are really good if you're on like the highway drive all the way through Texas, which is, can be a pretty long drive or a pretty big state. So those, have things that, taste really good. They're savory and they do have the processed white bun on it, but yeah, those are the kind of things that I can recall that I've had in the past.
Bucky's. Okay, that's definitely
Yeah, it's just like a mass. The gasoline station has probably 20 pumps.
okay.
If that gives you an idea how large this parking lot is. And I mean like 20 islands, maybe 15 islands.
Mm-hmm.
So they get a lot of business and they have really clean, awesome bathrooms.
Oh, that's always important. You got to know where those are. Yeah.
They're super nice.
Do they have the showers in there for the truck drivers and stuff?
I don't think that one is specifically for truck drivers. I think this is more for the consumer type, clean kind of place.
Cool.
So there you go. You got exposed to the Texas Bucky's. I don't know. They probably have them somewhere else too, but I know they're in Texas.
Yeah. No, that'd be fun. That makes me want to go to one, actually, kind of. Not that I want to buy food, but I just want to see.
It makes you think this is more of a real estate business, that they're capturing all that real estate and utilizing it for that business, and highway frontage road real estate. They buy it out in the middle of nowhere, and then over time these highways start building in their infrastructure, more expansion of cities. So I'm sure that the real estate value picks up over time. But anyway, back to those were 7 of the Michael Pollan food rules, which there are a lot of people out there talking about whole food, plant-based diets, paleo diets, all these various diets. Each person is unique. I personally think variety is a spice of life, and variety in our food is quite beneficial from a nutrient diversity standpoint. So different colors of plants, I think it's now, whether it's raw or cooked, you can sit there and split hairs. But if you're eating really unhealthy, just going to cutting out maybe sugary sodas and going to more greens, less meat, less processed, and maybe enjoying cooking again. I know you enjoy doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of a big fan.
We do enjoy cooking.
Yeah. And your kids.
Different ways of cooking.
What's that?
There's different ways of cooking too.
Yes.
There's the simple cooks like me, and there's the more complex cook like my wife. So
yeah. And I like to just throw salads together. I like a lot of color and textures and all that.
Cool. Yeah. So it's always good. You should be able to know how to eat. In fact, there was if you know Robert Rodriguez, the director guy, he wrote Once Upon a Time in Mexico and all that stuff. And
Machete.
Yes. And back when people had DVDs, I had the DVD for Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and there was this bonus section. And he had the best bonuses of any DVD I've ever found. Uh-huh. But one of them was Robert Rodriguez Cooking School.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he talked how to make puerco pibil, which is the dish that's very central to that movie. It's particularly Johnny Depp's character in it, because he's going around eating puerco pibil, and he finally finds the perfect dish and has to go kill the chef because he has to restore balance. He goes, "This is too perfect. We can't have this in the world."
Oh my gosh.
But, so and they gave the recipe for that, but it just made me laugh. And I'm not going to say the full thing because it's obscene. But Robert Rodriguez is like, I don't, people say they don't know how to cook, but to me, not knowing how to cook is like not knowing how to have sex, because it's like something that's like fundamental to.
Don't know how to survive and live.
Yeah, like survival. And I always think about that when people say they don't know how to cook. It just makes me laugh.
Yeah. And
because you should know how to cook.
Yeah, there's no reason, if you have internet, you're watching this. I mean, YouTube, there are so many websites. We have so much information out there, and just pick one or two. Don't get overwhelmed. Pick something, maybe pick your favorite type of ingredient, and then build around that, and then find different ways to make it that might be healthier. I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't try. Even though we're busy, you can batch. That's another suggestion, is batch cook on a Sunday if you work Monday through Friday, and you have leftovers that might rot eventually, but you can eat them over the following 2 or 3 days and pre-prepare them. You can separate them out ready to grab. And the more convenient you make it, the more likely you're going to eat it. So basically replicate what everyone else out there is trying to do and make things convenient. Create your own convenience, create variety, add more greens, which enhances more fiber. By the way, has a benefit of GI Function is better. When it comes to colon cancer and other things, it might be good to add those greens and fiber. You can always hide it in the meals themselves, or beans create fiber. You might have to work up to that if you're not used to it. A little GI distress for some people, but anyway, there's a lot of simple ways of cooking, and it doesn't always have to be elaborate. Like you said, you can be the simple cook. And those fryers, those air fryers nowadays I'm actually going to experience that tonight. I'm going to create my first salmon cooked in an air fryer. I've heard it's amazing. So I've been letting it marinate in some fresh lemon a friend of mine grows on her trees, and water and some salt, and just to kind of let it marinate in that for a little bit. And then I'm just going to put a little oil on it and put it in the fryer and see how it turns out.
Great. And we'll hear how it goes.
Yeah. Any last thoughts about some of these simple rules that people can screenshot?
I think we can wrap that up.
Okay.
So with that, this is the Change Physician Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and here with my co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady. Please join the community at thechangephysician.com. And until next time, stay well.